I thought I'd take some time today to talk about the video that I have on my screen here, which is the 100 consecutive double unders video that I recorded last summer. And the reason this whole thing came up is I was training last night and I did some sprint training and then I got into some tricks, so arm wraps and rotations, and then combined arm wraps with rotations, and then did some transitions from the arm wraps into just various types of crossover, as well as transitions from a rotation and arm wrap to the rope swinging backwards. So a standard jump, but with the rope rotating backwards. And I've been working on a lot of backwards stuff lately because it's sort of a new ball game. You know, if you're quite competent with skipping with the rope rotating forward, great. But when you start going backwards, it does mix things up a little and make things more difficult. So really been challenging myself lately with that kind of thing. But from there, I went on to 3 5-minute rounds. So what I do is I make sure I jump for 5 minutes straight, and then take a 2-minute break, another 5 minutes, and 2-minute break, and then another 5 minutes. And that's just to better my endurance, but it's also to get creative as well. So during that 5 minutes, I can do really whatever I want. It's a freestyle. But I try to conserve my energy, be as efficient as possible, but sometimes I like to have a little more fun and incorporate tricks and a lot of movement around the room, that kind of thing. And then during that, what happened was, as I was getting tired, primarily in the third round, midway through, I was jumping and I started to notice that I was having trouble landing in the same spot. So my efficiency was really dropping. And that there was because I was getting tired. And often when we get tired, our technique suffers. And then once our technique suffers, we start to compensate. So we land maybe too far forward and then have to jump backward, using that little more energy to get yourself back to where you want to be. But then at the same time, when you're using more energy, then your efficiency just plummets, and then it sort of spirals from there. So you want to be able to maintain as much efficiency as you can. That way your technique doesn't suffer and your endurance stays as best as it can. And it wasn't for me at that point. So I started landing too far forward and then jumping backward and then a little to the side and forward and back. And I thought, this is exactly what happened in my 100 consecutive double unders video. So you'll see in this video that I start sort of in the middle of the screen, but then I move toward the right. And it happens fairly early on in the repetitions. So I'm thinking, well, it can't only be because of exhaustion or just being too tired to land efficiently and that kind of thing. So what I noticed in this video is that it's difficult to maintain a consistent technique. And, no matter how good you are, the longer you go, the more difficult it can be. And I just thought of this video and, I jumped slightly higher than I should have, landing too far forward, even just slightly. And then it caused me to jump backwards. And then I just slowly started moving backward in the video. And I kind of wanted to emphasize to really pay attention to that kind of thing. Because when I was doing this, I wasn't really paying too much attention to that. I only noticed it sort of at the end of the repetitions when I was like, wait a minute, I definitely didn't stay in the same spot. So I wanted to emphasize to watch that, especially if you're doing something a lot of times, like multiple reps, whatever a lot of reps is for you, whether that's 5, 10, 50, 100, 200, 500, is to really notice where you're landing, because that'll give you a sign that your efficiency is dropping. And then you want to make the necessary corrections if you can, because it will affect your endurance in the long run. So I'll play the video here, and it starts right now. And things are going fairly well, and already I've started to move to the right. It would have been my left where I was. Everything else seems to be pretty stable though. Hands are in a good spot, upright, looking forward. Everything else I'm quite happy with, and it remained that way throughout. But of course, I started moving to the right, and I eventually am able to stop moving to the right. But if I had noticed during this, I would have likely corrected it a little sooner. But at this point, I'm not. It wouldn't be exhaustion or anything like that that would be affecting me. That would be around the 90 to the 92nd rep, and you can see even now my mouth open, and my technique started getting sloppy. The jumps were a little all over the place, and we'll see if we can kind of look at that again. And it's about here. So my mouth opens. I went forward a little more. So if I were to go maybe to 115, 120, then I really would have started to get tired. My efficiency would have plummeted, and I would have likely had to stop. Yesterday I noticed that I was landing in multiple places, and I immediately thought of this video, and I thought, you know what? I want to talk about that. And emphasize, keep an eye on where you're landing when you jump. The double under is a great one if you're starting to just learn it. Then that's something to pay attention to. And I wouldn't be too concerned about that at the beginning if you're learning the double under. Really, then you just want to get your technique down. You want to make sure that you're able to get over 2 rotations of the rope in a single jump. And as you become more efficient, you'll definitely get better. One of the things that really helps, and I do a pretty good job of it here, is keeping the jump height fairly stable. As you can see, my jump height doesn't really change other than the times. There were a couple there where I jumped a little higher and went a little more forward than I wanted to, but otherwise my jump height remained pretty stable, and that will help a lot with landing in a similar spot. Because a lot of people, especially with the double under, and I mentioned this in my podcast in Achieving the Double Under, that a lot of people at the beginning think, hey, I'm doing the double under, I need to jump higher. And that's often the case because the power might not be there, their technique might not be there, and they just have to jump higher in order to get over 2 rotations of the rope. And if you're able to do that at the beginning, great. But over time, what you want to do is minimize the actual height of your jump, and then gain the necessary technique and strength in the wrists, which play a huge role in the double under, in order to not have to jump high. That way, you're just way more efficient. You'll be able to go longer in your jumps. Your endurance will increase, and you'll just be able to do more double unders. And it will help prevent things like you saw here, where my jumps slightly varied and I was moving to the right, which ultimately wasn't desirable. But I was still able to achieve the 100 double unders, and I'd say at this point I could probably do maybe 115, 120 consecutively. And another thing to note there, I was using a short-handled rope, so that's something you want to start with if you are just getting to know the double under. I like to do them a lot of the time with a long-handled rope, just because I love using them. They're very versatile. I can do explosive techniques like the double or triple under, but I can also incorporate tricks into them, and especially crossbody tricks, which I really love to do. So I tend to use the long-handled ropes, which do make it a little bit tougher because it'll challenge your grip strength just to get that rope around and generate that power in the wrist. For me, I really like that. I like challenging my grip strength, but just keep that in mind if you're new to them. You'll want to use a very light rope, short handles. I know some start with a steel cable rope, which I also talk about in the Achieving the Double Under podcast, but I do not recommend it unless you have a baseline competency in jump rope, because I actually did that. I started jumping with a steel cable rope, and the handles were fairly long, but it didn't matter as much because it was a very, very light rope, so it wasn't too challenging to my grip strength. But the reason I don't recommend it for people that are new to jump rope and are just getting used to double unders is that it really, really hurts. I don't know how many lashes marks I had on my upper body, especially because I trained without a shirt for a lot of that time, and it was very, very painful. So I highly recommend that you have a baseline competency in jump rope first before you try the steel cable rope. But something like a short-handled PVC rope like the one I'm using in the video will do great in order for you to learn the double under. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that in this video, and it did a great job of demonstrating that, how I started in the middle of the screen and then I moved to the right, and my jumps weren't as efficient as they could have been. My landings sort of forced me to slowly move to the right, which is something to pay attention to in your jumps. If you're finding that you are, even for regular single jumps, if you're finding that you're having a difficult time landing in the same spot, then you'll want to minimize the amount you're doing at once. Use shadow jumping. Like step 3, which I've gone over a fair bit in my vlogs and podcasts, so I highly suggest you check them out. But slow it down, break the reps down into fewer amounts. That way you can really not only gain a strength and endurance, but the efficiency as well, and just add more reps and slowly build your skill with the rope, and you'll be able to achieve them. Even if it's single jumps, and land in the relative same spot, which is what you want, because once it falls off the rails, it's really hard to recover because your endurance fails and you just get more tired and tired, and then the technique gets sloppier and sloppier. So overall, it's harder to keep going. Okay, so something to keep in mind. I just wanted to chat about that because it's not something I've mentioned too much. And I wanted to use that video as well because it did a really good job of demonstrating that. So, I certainly have more to learn and to get better at as well. And I do want to update this video as well in the coming months and just see how many I can do. Maybe I'll try for 120, 150, who knows. But anyway, that's it for this episode of the vlog. I just wanted to throw this at you, and hopefully you get a little bit from it. I encourage you to check out the latest podcast, which is Achieving the Double Under. I put a ton of work into that, and so there's a lot of insight there. And for anyone learning it, and even intermediate or advanced practitioners, I think, can learn something. But anything I do, I like to tailor it a little more to beginners than they can learn, because I went through a lot of the mistakes as a beginner. Approach things that might not have been ideal, so it took me a lot longer to grasp them. So hopefully I can relay the information to you in hopes that you kind of get there a little quicker than I did. But anyway, that's it for this episode of the vlog. Stay tuned for more, and you can check out the podcast on iTunes, on Elevate Your Craft, all one word. It's also on YouTube. And be sure to follow me on Twitter at EYCKAS. The YouTube channel is Elevate Your Craft, all one word. And I am also on Facebook, Elevate Your Craft, all one word. That's the platform I tend to focus on most, is Facebook, but I do post to everything else as well. So be sure to check those out, and I'll catch you next time.